Thank you very much, and welcome to all the participants. I see we have a good crowd already, and more might join us. This topic, of course, is really dear to our hearts. Data and cities is extremely important for all the work that we do at ADB. And in our work, we often say that data really resides with people locally. And oftentimes we think of data in an aggregate manner. We think of it as big data. We think of it as data that sits with ministries or statistics offices. But really, you who are at the ground level, at the local level, working on public services and providing public services locally, designing cities, you are really at the forefront of making that data useful to people's lives. And therefore, I could not think of a more important audience and group to work with today. So welcome to the webinar. We're going to start off our program with one of those Mentimeter polls. And as was just shared, you can participate by using your computer, your tablet, your mobile phone. All you need to do is scan the QR code that will be displayed on screen and is also going to be shared in chat, if I can ask the team to do so. And the first question really is about your level of experience. We want to understand who we have in the audience today. Your experience in designing urban data projects in your city. You can basically give us a range between zero experience and being a data expert. And it's very useful for us to know who joined us today, so we can maybe at times dive in a bit deeper, explain more. And those of you who are experts, please give us some very smart queries and questions that we can work with during the event. Of course, everyone is invited to put in their questions and concerns into the Q&A dialogue that you will find at the bottom of the screen. Excellent. So we have a lot of people, and please, those who have not yet responded, navigate to menti.com, and then add the number that's here at the top, 7639-1551. That gets you into our poll. And I don't think you need to close the window. We're going to be doing more of these polls later. You can just keep that open. All right, excellent. So we're seeing really a nice diagonal line here from a lot of people who have zero experience and who are new to the topic to one data expert. Very good. Welcome. And you're probably more of an expert than I am. Excellent. So this gives us a bit of a picture. There are quite a few people who have not yet made it to menti.com or who are a bit shy to share. So please, if you can, during the webinar, navigate to that website. We'd love to get some more inputs from you later on. This is the warm-up question. We have 2 more to go. Okay, colleagues, with that, I would like to ask our first speaker to give us a presentation. We have 2 speakers today, and I do want to make an announcement. In fact, we did want Mr. John Hawke of the City of Perth to join us and give his inputs as well, but he's unable to join this afternoon's webinar. We extend our apologies for those who are looking forward to his presentation. We look forward to engage him in one of the next webinars. But for today, we have 2 excellent presenters, and you'll get a bit more of their time. Usually we're quite rushed, and today we get to extend the presentations a bit longer. So you'll hear 2 presentations, and then it's time for your Q&A. So please keep those questions coming. Enough with the opening. Let me introduce the first speaker. We have Andy Brani, who is the head of SMART at Ramboll Singapore. And he's responsible for leading the smart engineering consultancy services in the Middle East and Asia Pacific region. As a co-founder of Smart Engineering Services at Ramboll, he has a passion for creating new and innovative solutions to enable clients to meet their business goals, while also providing a sustainable, more livable society. He recently co-created the post-pandemic workplace design service at Ramboll, which utilizes a combination of technology coupled with multidisciplinary design interventions that adapt our built environment in response to the pandemic. Over to you, Andy. I have slowed my talk down, and please remember, nice and easy.
Thank you, Han.
Welcome, and over to you.
Wonderful, thank you, and thank you everybody for taking the time today to attend this this webinar. Very excited to be beginning this series around data, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see with our participants on the guided learning program, the work that they do, and also to engage with everybody attending these webinars in the exchange of ideas and discussions that we have. So with that, I will begin sharing my screen. Can everybody see my screen okay? Wonderful.
Yes, it's fine.
Thank you. So today, in my topic, actually, it's I will be talking about actually the why of data collection. So I think it was really fantastic to see in the initial poll, the spread of people with different experience. I would actually say that you guys who have zero experience, that's great, you know, because actually I feel that it's good to start with the kind of topics and fundamentals we're about to go through, and that should help you hopefully on your journey as you go through creating new projects. So really today I'm going to cover kind of 4 key elements, really. The first one is starting at the end, really understanding why you're doing what you're doing, knowing your user and some of the methods and the approaches that you can take to understand them, doing your research around then what are the ideas you can have around data projects and other technology projects that you design for these users, and then about designing the outcome and how you then move on to say, okay, this is what I'm proceeding with. And then actually Sarah's presentation will dovetail beautifully into that, because she will then talk about the actual methods of collecting data. And so this will work quite well. So I'm going to start with, as all these presentations do, with a cliche Steve Jobs quote. But quite true, unfortunately, it's quite true what he says. And he says that, you know, you have to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and, you know, figure out where to sell it. Now, of course, in the context of discussions with governments and with stakeholders like yourselves, really think about the citizens. It's replacing that and saying, okay, we start with what do the citizens want and need actually, and what is the future plan for our development. And then, as you say, working backwards with the communities and with those people to establish projects that will have a meaningful impact. I think far too often we talk about data, we talk about technology projects. Unfortunately, there are many that fail. And a lot of those fail because they don't either engage the users and find out actually what they want, or they don't actually engage them in a way that the users understand what it means to them and how to use these new approaches. So start with the end in mind. That's my first point. Think about what you're trying to achieve. The second element then is really around knowing your user. And so what we want to do is we want to understand who are the people we are serving. Now, you can't go and interview every one of your citizens in your town or in your city or in your area. That will be impractical. So what we do is we borrow some tools from the technology sector, actually, in terms of how do we group users so that we can understand, you know, the different components of people within our city and what they need, and have a broader application of what we're designing. I always say that, you know, it's really, technology should never have one use case if you're implementing it. It should never just serve one user. For it to be real value, or for any design intervention to give you a real value, it must serve multiple people. Then we want to understand their wants, needs, and pains, and we'll talk a little about that. And then, of course, you then map the user journey. Now, user journey in this case is actually is less about the journey itself, but more about how does it affect the overall experience of the user in their day-to-day lives. So I think the first thing really to look at is that people's requirements are changing constantly, particularly with the younger generation, with Generation Z. They are actually now changing what is expected from governments and from cities. You know, they want, we used to talk about work-life balance, and actually we're moving more now towards work-life integration. And actually, because work and life are becoming more integrated, actually we're seeing a higher demand for people want to work in jobs that give them meaning and tie to them in their personal lives. They want to have impact. It's not a job for a salary so much anymore. It's a job for them to have an impact in the world. And of course, this is also driven by the fact that Gen Z are much more ethical consumers than we used to have. So greenwashing, and you'll have heard all of these words coming around because actually people are calling out, you know, institutions and companies that are actually saying they're sustainable or saying they behave in a certain way, but as this more aware demographic comes of age, they are actually calling out those different elements. So I think the first thing to do, and this is something that for those in the guided learning program with the e-learning will see, is that actually what we need to do is first get together with the relevant stakeholders and understand and categorize who are we serving. So we can do this through workshops at a high level, and this worksheet that you see here actually will be provided for those doing the e-learning course in your work pack. And really what this is about trying to do is understand what are, as we said, the drivers of the people we're serving, but also how do they use technology? Because we shouldn't just go and put technology in a place that is not appropriate or that people will not want to use it. So how do we understand, you know, where do they lie? Do they have the skills necessary, our target user group, to actually take part and be involved in this project? So for example, if you have an area perhaps where you have a large elderly population that may or may not be technologically literate in such a level, then actually putting in projects that may exclude them or make it more difficult for their lives day to day would obviously be something we want to avoid. And so it's really key that we have an inclusive future. And what we do is by creating these persona sheets, we then start to understand those buckets of users that I talked about. Now, I use the word users here, not as a technology or app, you know, a technology company term, but more because actually the way we see it, although you see here on screen, you see about humans, actually we see nature as also a user. So in all of these projects, we mustn't forget what we're trying to do here with smart cities. We're trying to create more safe, sustainable, equitable cities. And that's not just for humans either. It's also for nature and nature around us. So we have to protect the ecosystem. But on this side, we normally specify around 5 to 7 user groups. And the reason for that is, I heard a great quote once, which said, and I'm not sure how this will translate, but if you don't know who you're designing for, it's like writing a love letter and addressing it to whom it may concern. And I think that's a really great analogy that we need to understand our users. So we understand those groups, but then also as well, perhaps the city level, and we need to think about what are the kind of organizations that we want to attract to the cities as well. So thinking about the integration with the economic planning of a city. So looking at what do the corporates that we want to attract, what are they trying to achieve? So, you know, most people now are saying they're going net zero or they're going to go carbon negative in the next 5-10 years. And so how do we, again, design interventions that could help them to achieve those goals and thus in your city become an attractor for those kinds of corporate clients? Then moving on from that phase, then really we want to then conduct some research into getting to know the wants, the needs, and the pains of these users firsthand. So this is one example where actually we conducted a study, a primary research study with some users for a project in Korea. And what we were asking them there was a few different questions around, so we understood demographics, we understood how they use technology on a daily basis, and how they use space. And what was very interesting as well is looking at how people think they use space versus how they actually use space as well, because human beings are interesting things, and so we think one thing but actually behave in another way. And so actually this could be an area of research as well. Why can't you do data projects even to validate your assumptions within the data project? And this is something we're doing right now for a different client, but also thinking about less traditional methods as well. So this is what's called I think they call it a bag study, if I remember rightly. And what you do is you go to your target user groups and you ask them if they will be willing to empty their bag on the table. And basically what you then do is start to look at what they carry with them on a daily basis. And this can actually give you some very interesting insights. So, here we have, so if we start with the top left, the cat butt candy. Actually, these are quite quirky. This could be quite a quirky person. They like to be individual and they like to express themselves in certain ways. They have stamps, so they may use the postal service. Well, does that mean that they prefer the personal touch over something less cold? Maybe they see email as a little more cold and rigid. They have vouchers in their bag, and maybe they're thrifty, and that shows actually that they care about the cost of things. They only carry change, so actually that change, considering they're a driver, could be for parking, and they don't really carry cash generally. So do they use cards or mobile payments instead of cash? And of course they have these sketchbooks, which shows that they may be quite artistic. So it's amazing what you can see from what somebody carries with them on a daily basis. And this can tell you a lot about the users you're trying to serve. So once we've understood the users and we've understood what their wants, needs, and pains are and who they are, then we need to start thinking about, okay, how can we address this? Or what other wider problems could these tie into? And so now it's time to do your research. And so we can use websites such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals to really understand what problems they're trying to tackle. We can use websites such as the World Economic Forum, which has a global risks map and actually outlines there some of the biggest risks facing us at the moment. Of course, in the Asian context, there's the Asian Smart Cities framework and the work that we're doing in the Asian Smart Cities Trust Fund. You can look at what's being done in those areas. We have calls for proposals out for different projects, for innovative technology projects at the moment under different streams. And so these are things you can look at as well for inspiration as well. And then looking as well at the technology trends. So this is just an example table of some of the trends in different areas, but really thinking about what is next and what is coming and how that ties back to your users' wants, needs, and pains. And there's many tools to do this. So when we look at technology trends, we have to futurecast, we have to think forward a little. And so there's multiple tools to do this. And for those on the guided learning program, e-learning, some of these are provided in your pack. But one tool is things like the future cone, whereby what we do is we cast forward our vision of what could be coming in the future, and down the middle is what is pretty certain will just continue if we just continue today. But then as we get wider out, we get more and more crazy ideas and more big ideas about, are we living on Mars instead of Earth? And things such as this if you go really far out. And so these things are very important to consider within your thought process. And I always say at this stage at the beginning, don't restrict yourself right now based on what is practical today. I think that's very, very key, because later we will refine the ideas to practicality, of course. But at the beginning, don't limit yourself by what is now. And one good example of that is actually the technology radar on the right. Now, this platform is not a free platform, but they do these interesting technology radars. And actually, they use some films at the moment to say, okay, what were the technologies in Blade Runner 2049? And then actually, how close are we to some of those technologies? And so the dots that you see that are closest to the center, they are the closest to realization. And just as a side note for you interested in those interested in how this is measured, NASA developed an approach called the TRL, the Technology Readiness Level, and that goes from 1 to 9 about how prepared that technology and developed that technology is. Something, again, really interesting to look at. So then once you've done that research, you understand your users, you've looked at the trends, and you've identified some maybe interesting areas for exploration. You then need to get down to understanding, okay, what is your use case and what is the outcome you're trying to achieve? And so that's where this comes in. And so what you see here is some initial ideas for one other project that we're working on, where we're looking at what are the use cases that we could introduce to achieve the research that we've done. So we follow the same process, by the way, on our projects that we do for clients. It's the exact same processes we use. And so here was some of our initial use cases, and we're deploying a few of these in that project. And then also what you need to do then is think about how this integrates into their life. So remember I mentioned about mapping the user journey. Well, this is what that looks like. So, you know, here we were working on a healthcare project, and we were understanding what is the role of having wearables and autonomous vehicles and cloud integrated healthcare and new hospitals. How would that actually change people's experience of healthcare? And so we started to imagine that, and you should do this for your use cases also. So really start to think through, okay, what happens today, or what is the process today in what we're examining? And what is the process if this is successful? But I also think it's very important to also ask yourself, what if this does not go the way I think it will? What's the worst case outcome as well? It's always good to stress test your ideas so that we don't inadvertently introduce something undesirable into this. But I think it's a really healthy exercise. And then actually for each one of those use cases, and in your case, for whichever use case you decide to pursue, then actually it's about then really defining that very, very clearly about what you are doing and why you're doing it, where you're going to do this pilot and how you're going to roll it out, and then what does that mean in terms of infrastructure and the like. And remember that when you first go to do your collection and your first iteration of the project, you don't need to have everything 100% figured out either. And don't be afraid, it's not an expensive exercise necessarily to go and do some of this. So for example, I have a sensor here, actually, that we're building right now, which you can partially see, for a client in Singapore, where we're actually trying to test out some of the electronic booking in the eating centers here. And so this was done with an Arduino board, which if you're aware, it's just a homemade little, well, it's a chipboard that you can program at home quite easily. And the whole thing costs $20, 20 Singapore dollars to put together. So you don't, innovation doesn't need to cost a fortune to do this. And don't be worried about iterating your idea. So I think in conclusion, what I would say to you is that, you know, firstly, the projects that should be designed with the end user at the heart, whether that's people, nature, or even corporates. Think about what you're trying to achieve. Initially, let your imagination run wild. You know, ask exploratory questions as well, like why do we do things this way? You know, and what if we didn't? So one recent example of this was something I've been discussing internally at the moment, which is it okay to delete emails when you go on holiday? Now, this is not a technology question, but it's the idea of challenging what we do now versus could things be better? Right? We all get a mountain of emails when we come back from holiday. Nobody likes it, but yet everybody keeps those emails. And so why don't we do something different to change if people don't like it? So just that idea of challenging the why do we do this? Is it just because it's what we've always done? Or is there a real valid reason as to why we should keep doing that? You know, we must consider both sides. And then, and only then, once you've established those elements, should you work backwards to an actual solution to what you're trying to achieve. And so that's my speech. I think I'm slightly ahead of time. Please, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or have any further discussion, the QR code there will take you to my LinkedIn to connect on there. I welcome any questions and discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andy. And what you've done is really you've zoomed out and you've taken the data collection to basically the first thought even about what should we be doing? How can we impact our users? And you kind of reminded us, you first, I think, described the users as citizens, but you also mentioned that corporates, companies are also users, and pretty much everyone that we're serving with our work. So it could be businesses, citizens, even other parts of government, right? We might be designing a solution, a data solution that will be used by other government officials. And I like that you talk about the use case and the pilots. I think that's where the framing of the workshop is a little bit. You know, what could you try out? And when we get to the next presentation, we talk more about the different data collection methods. But at this point, what Andy is outlining here is how do we even think and evolve our thinking around what could be interesting to explore, what could be transformational when we think about the futures picture that you shared. Very interesting presentation. And
thank you.
Any questions for Andy, please put them into the Q&A box, and we will get to them later during the Q&A session. Right now, we'd like to get your feedback again via Mentimeter. For that, again, please go to www.menti.com and enter the code 76391551. That then takes you to the question that we would like to ask you now. And that is, what is the primary driver you consider when you develop a data project? And for those of you who haven't done one yet, what would you consider to be the primary driver? Would it be the impact you want to create, the outcome, the practicality of it? Can we do this? Can we not do this? How expensive is this? Do we have the capacities? All the things around it that Andy just said. Don't worry, you can do it simply. You can do it very complex. It's up to you. Or is it about the cost? Where again, Andy said, you know, you can start with something fairly cheap and cheerful, something that might not even cost anything because you're just using mobile phones, people, or whatever, all the way to equipping your entire town with IoT sensors. So there is a big bandwidth. I can see people are driven by outcomes. Isn't that amazing? I think that is great, because what really the point of this first presentation, I feel, is yes, the rest is important, but you gotta think about what you're trying to impact people with. How is their life going to change with your initiative? Where do you want to be with your city in future? And how can you use data to make it happen? Excellent. And I really like all of these three. So no bias here, but we can see that people have they're outcome driven, and that's excellent to see. Thanks, everyone. So now we'd like to go to our next presenter. And we will, as I said, gather your questions for Andy in the Q&A and get back to them later. But now let me introduce Dr. Sarah Scherauzin, whose areas of research really span a wide area of work. She's a lecturer and lead convener, the Smart Cities and Infrastructure Cluster at the School of Built Environment, the University of New South Wales, Australia. So she covers a wide range of topics, including advanced GIS, NDVIM, sensing technologies, digital twins, artificial intelligence for applications in smart cities, infrastructure, urban development, and construction. Sarah teaches and supervises students on city analytics, GIS, construction informatics, and BIM relevant topics at undergrad and postgrad levels at the university. BIM, by the way, is building information management, has a lot to do with all the data flowing through a building during its initial stages and all the way to the end operation. She's currently an editorial board member of the Journals of Sustainability and Advanced Civil Engineering. She's also a topic board member of the ISPRS International Journal of Geoinformation and Buildings, as well as the review editor of Frontiers in Sustainable Cities. Sarah completed her PhD in geomatics engineering from the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of New South Wales. Thank you very much for joining us, Sarah, and over to you for your presentation. Looking forward.
Thank you very much, Arndt, and thank you very much, everyone, for attending this session. It's really, a pleasure being here, presenting some of my works that we have done at university. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. So I am teaching courses that are relevant to data processing, and in the courses that I'm teaching, usually we use different types of data, different types of location data for informed decision making, for smarter cities, for smarter buildings, smarter decision making. And I'm very pleased that the courses that we are teaching at UNSW has helped our students when they graduate. They work in different government departments, and they use the skills they learn for data processing and for informed decision making in in policies and relevant fields of studies. So today I'm going to show you some methods that I have used in my research and my teaching relevant to data collection. And I start by talking about remote sensing data, different types of remote sensing data. I talk about remote sensing data at city scale. I will talk about using mobile scanners, cameras at for collecting of street level data, and also some emerging methods of data collection, such as crowdsourcing data collection methods using apps and also web scraping. And these two new methods are nowadays becoming popular among our students for advanced and cutting edge research, and I'll show you some examples. Okay, so if we want to talk about remote sensing or sensing technologies, I think it's best if we start from looking at the spectrum of electromagnetic wavelengths that are demonstrated in this slide. And as you can see here in this slide, the electromagnetic spectrum has very short wavelengths to very long wavelengths, and the the remote sensing technologies, they use different range of these wavelengths. For example, for Lidar systems or for photogrammetry systems, we use the wavelengths in this specific range demonstrated here. And for for radar, we have longer wavelengths. I will talk about Lidar, radar, and photogrammetry in more details. I just want to tell you, we have different three types. I'm going to talk about three types of sensing technologies and remote sensing technologies. One of them is, photogrammetry, that we use, visible light for, collecting images, photos on Earth. And also we have Lidar, which is, we can, use Lidar technology for collecting usually three-dimensional data, and this is in this specific wavelengths. I'm not going to go to the details of this technical concept. I just want to tell you that the difference between sensing technologies comes from the difference of the wavelengths used for each technology. So satellites can collect data on relevant to Earth, and we have satellites for collecting different types of remote sensing data. We have satellites for collecting images above ground. We have satellites for collecting radar, and also we have some satellites very few satellites for collecting LiDAR data. And we also, in addition to satellite data and satellite for imagery, we also can collect data using airplanes and drones. And we can use this. For example, we can mount the cameras on on airplanes and collect more accurate, usually photos of Earth, using airplanes. And these kind of satellites, there are different types of satellites. Some satellites, are good for large scale, mapping and analysis, and some of the satellites, produce collect actually, more accurate data. And depending on our application and purpose, as Andy said, we need to know what is our purpose. Based on our purpose, we can choose any of these types of satellites, satellite data to use for for analysis of what's going on Earth. And for example, if I wanted, for a project that we had at City Futures Research Center last year, I wanted to demonstrate how vegetation cover has changed over time using Landsat data, and I used time lapse from planet.com website, and I produced this visualization of changes from 1984 to to I think 2018 or something. And you can see, if I play this video, you can see how change has occurred in this specific part of Western Sydney from vegetated cover towards urbanized area. So we can see built we can see these areas of for example, new houses, new industry, land uses over time using this satellite data. And it is okay because we don't want really very accurate data, right? And if we want to use more accurate data, then we can use aerial images, such as the images available by Nearmap. And I used, for example, for same project, I used Nearmap data to demonstrate the changes of western part of Sydney when before and after construction of the new airport in Western Sydney. And you can see here that this change has occurred, and this land use actually is visible between 2016 and 2020. So this is kind of the purpose was visualization, and it's enough, right? So to visualize these kind of changes, we can use remote sensing data for various applications. One application is, for example, for deriving different kinds of urban morphology. We can use it for urban heat temperature demonstration, and even urban heat island demonstration. So in this paper, the authors used remote sensing data for demonstration of different types of urban morphology using remote sensing data. My favorite remote sensing data that I used a lot, for my PhD thesis, and after that I used for different applications in construction, is LiDAR data. What is LiDAR, and which kind of information we can get from LiDAR data? LiDAR data is a kind of 3D data that gives us the information of easting, northing, and height of a specific point. So the LiDAR equipment usually is mounted on, on a drone, on an airplane, and then, laser beams are emitted towards the, the target. The target could be, for example, built environment, could be, trees, terrain, roads, and then the return is collected, and then a nice visualization like this can be seen in using different software packages. So in this LiDAR data collected over University of New South Wales, I used this data for my PhD thesis. You can see here we have points, very dense points of data, and each point represents, northing, easting, and height information. And you can see, even, the slope of terrain, and also, on which areas we have a slant area, and we can, completely see, so the ground, and all the objects on the ground. So I can show you now how accurate is this data that I showed you in the previous slide, and I used it for urban change detection. If you can see that the point spacing between the points of LiDAR data is about 15 centimeter to 20 centimeter. So we can collect this kind of accurate data using drones, and this data is collected by School of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Water Research Lab, where our colleagues collected, this data for, demonstration of the changes before and after a storm. And you can see here, for example, in this photo, we have LiDAR data. The LiDAR data is collected, and in this photo, the photo is collected. Okay, so the advantage of LiDAR is that we can see, we can calculate the amount of volume of change. For example, here, this is before, a storm, and this is after a storm, and we can see the amount of erosion or, sand movement before and after, a storm, and we can even, calculate the volume of this change using LiDAR data. LiDAR data also is used by some authors, in some countries, especially Spain, to characterize urban morphology, not in two-dimensional, but also in three-dimensional, and this is kind of cutting edge. Now, okay, I talked about photogrammetry and LiDAR data, and now let's talk about radar, which is very good source of information for us if we want to see some information that cannot be collected by LiDAR or by visible range of wavelengths. Then we can use radar for penetrating underground, for penetrating tree canopy to to see what is going on underground, to see what is going on in forests, on the surface terrain of the forest, because sometimes if for example we take photo over forest, we can see the canopy, but we cannot see what is going on on the surface of the on the ground surface of the forest. In that case, we can use, for example, a specific band of radar to to see what's going on the surface of the forest. In snowy areas, we can see what's going on the ground surface under snow. And this is the value of radar. Radar also can be used for demonstration of what's going on underground, the displacement, the holes underground, and these kind of issues can be avoided if we can monitor areas under underground using radar. It's a little bit, the data from radar is a little bit noisy, and working with radar is more difficult than other remote sensing data sets, but it's very valuable to gain this kind of skills. And also radar can be used for kind of a demonstration of displacements, vertical displacements, and these vertical displacements usually happen if we have some activities underground. For example, if we have tunneling underground, if we have water extraction on underground, then this surface displacement happens, and usually sometimes result in hazards in urban areas. So if we use a radar, then we can demonstrate these displacements, and we can monitor these areas to avoid hazards. And this is one area that you can see here. We had demonstrated around 3 centimeter of vertical displacement as a result of water extraction underground, and you can see this area of affected by this. So the radar systems are some of the radar systems also are installed on some handheld devices, such as the one that you can see here. and these are good for monitoring what is going on underground in terms of specifically for leaking, for example, pipes, or if there are pipes defected or something, for defect detection. It's this kind of ground penetrating radar is a very good tool. I also use RTK GNSS for validation of change detection results in my PhD studies, and this device is kind of surveying tool that gives us very accurate information regarding easting, northing, and elevation above Earth. And the only shortcoming of this method is that if we use it in dense urban areas or in very in dense vegetated areas, then the point of extraction may not be that much accurate. For this experiment, it was okay for me because I had to go to the rooftop of the buildings and get some information regarding the height of the buildings. We also use different we have this kind of tools at UNSW, like laser scanners, mobile laser scanners to collect data. And in this method, I used this scanner to collect such data from one of the buildings of UNSW. The accuracy is 2 centimeter to 3 centimeter, and it's very good for replacement of traditional measurements. And also we have other tools like BLK360, which is terrestrial mobile scanner, terrestrial scanner, and also a Matterport, which is another terrestrial scanner. And you can see, for example, this kind of method using this BLK scanner. We collected data of the facade of this building, which is our building, built environment building at UNSW, and you can see that the RGB information is overlaid on the point cloud data on this using this scanner. Using this Matterport, one of my master students, MPhil students, collected this kind of information using this scanner to make a as-built model of a building. And so I'm sure that you have heard that iPhone can also collect Lidar data, and I have tested this, and it was amazing. I really liked it. So there are other type of data collection methods that can be used. We can collect photogrammetry data using drones, and we can collect a street level data using mobile mapping, using cameras mounted on cars, like for example this Google Street View kind of mapping. And if for processing of this kind of data, photogrammetry data from drones, usually we need specific software packages to be able to process them. And CCTV cameras give kind of collect a lot of good information, good data for us. But this is for processing this kind of data, we really need to use a big data processing methods to be able to process these videos produced by these CCTV cameras. Nowadays, as I told at the beginning, we have there are some apps developed by different organizations, universities, mapping companies. They use these apps, they produce these apps, they make these apps to collect location data. For example, in this paper, our colleagues at Built Environment developed an app to collect information regarding the opinion of elderly for enhancement of livability in regional city centers. And you can see here, for example, the location of these people who were talking about this kind of livability. And then this kind of data can be further processed by different methods. And also we can, extract data from, open platforms, and for example, from OpenStreetMaps, or there are some data sets available nowadays via open data platforms. For example, New South Wales, data platform, or city data platform at a school at City Futures Research Center. We provide some open data sets available at city scale. And sometimes there are some plugins in different software packages that help you to get these free data sets, such as, for example, Quick OSM, which is a plugin in QGIS, which is open access, and you can select which kind of data you want, and then map this kind of data on QGIS. Also, some of my colleagues in City Futures Research Center, they collected data from Rider Log app that it records kind of bicycle route track, and then they use this kind of data. They anonymized the data, and then they wanted to know on which areas we have kind of a specific spatial pattern for these bicycle routes. And nowadays there are some other methods called web scraping. Web scraping is a method that we use web pages to to extract data, and the data in web pages could be images, text, could be data in figures, tables, and then we can use this web scraping method to get data in CSV files or in Excel file. In one research done by our students in city analytics specialization at UNSW, our student was interested to know how is the trend of hate speech during COVID. And we know that during COVID social platforms were used a lot, and she found that the network became stronger. The network of Twitter became stronger during COVID, and it is obvious. But she also found on which areas in Sydney we have a higher level of hate speech during COVID, and she mapped these clusters over time. And you can see she used this Twitter scraping method here for to be able to to extract such data in CSV file format. And we are going to publish this result as a book chapter in our upcoming Routledge book. And yes, in conclusion, I can certainly say that remote sensing gives us a lot of valuable urban information at city scale, at building and street scale. And mobile and terrestrial laser scanners are really amazing nowadays for extracting very accurate information, even up to centimeter accuracy. And nowadays, crowdsourcing apps and web scraping methods are emerging methods of data collection that can be used for informed decision making, for making better strategies or policies for future cities. Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was quite the tour de force around the various technologies that you can leverage. Thank you for this. And I think even though you deal very much with the built environment, you've also mentioned some of the methods that people who are involved in, let's say, social protection schemes and other areas of government work could be thinking about, like, for example, the sentiment analysis that you mentioned.
Yes.
So very interesting. We have a poll, a Mentimeter for your presentation as well, which I thought we would get into right away. So again, everybody's invited to go to menti.com, enter the code 76391551. You're probably still there, so please give us your feedback on the next question. And that is, which of the following types of data would you think be difficult to collect in your city? And then I would like a comment from Sarah on the results.
Sure.
So Lidar sounded quite difficult, it seems.
Yes.
Is that true?
This is what I expected, because LiDAR technology is very expensive and requires skills for collecting and also skills for kind of processing of LiDAR data. When I started working with LiDAR in 2011, I remember that many people told me avoid working on this topic because it is very difficult topic, difficult to get data. But I insisted to continue, and yeah, I think it is really what I was expecting. To see the difficulty of getting access to LiDAR, and that's true. And also even radar, I thought maybe radar collection could be difficult. Yeah.
So it's not so much about what you're touching on is not about the availability of this data. It's about the usage of this data. But in terms of radar, and this is where I show off a bit of tech knowledge from my work in ADB, we work a lot with Earth observation data. And many data sets there are free and open data. They're basically Landsat data, ESA data. This is the European Space Agency, the American Space Agency. A lot of others put their data up for usage, and everybody can use it for free. But these are massive data sets. They require computing power. They require payment for cloud services. The use requires skills. So it's free and open, but somehow still the journey in is quite tricky.
Yeah, correct.
And we are. Yeah, and we are trying to figure out how we can provide intermediate services and support to our member countries in using these massive data sets better and using them for implementation, but also for disaster preparedness, for crisis preparedness. So this is in the works. We have a very good partnership with the European Space Agency and the Japanese Space Agency to basically use their data sets. There is people concerned with this, but yeah, we can tell also from the responses here, those two were tricky, LiDAR, radar. Very interesting. And thanks for giving us feedback, dear participants. And I'm so excited. We have lots of questions in the Q&A box. And what I thought we would do, so we have, of course, questions related to both these presentations. But let's start with the questions related to the first presentation. Which was zooming out a bit and really thinking about, who do we do all this for? Who are our users? How do we define our users? And there's some good ones here. And Andy, if I can request you to respond to maybe this one here. Do you have any tips on identifying the key users? How do you go about that? Is there a particular category of users that we need to make sure is represented in our use cases? Sounds a bit difficult. And then there's another one that says, how do you deal with users with different needs in a community? Sometimes it's difficult to tailor everything just to fit their needs. We can't always satisfy everybody's needs. So a little bit about definition, and then how do we target certain user groups? Is that part of the design as well?
Yeah, great questions, and there's no easy answer to either of them, actually. So let me just start by the first one about how perhaps we define the users. So what I would say is that at a city scale, you can obviously start by understanding, there's two ways to start this. So if you're actually looking for a project, if you want to do some good, but you're not quite sure what to do, I would suggest you start by looking at census data if you have that available to you, and start understanding the demographics of your city, and then understanding the users from that standpoint. That's partially the way you can start to understand who you're serving. But what I find more often than not is that people have an idea, actually. So if you think about it, I'm sure many people on the call today actually have had at least one or two ideas that they've thought of when they've come across a certain problem themselves or the like. So then it's about, okay, doing research online. I mean, use platforms such as LinkedIn. You can do LinkedIn polls to find out if other people face the same problem that you think you've identified as an initial idea. So you can start to see if those people actually exist and what kind of people respond to that poll as well. So that's a free way of gathering that information. And then, of course, you can go and do your primary research as well in your area. But I would think that, again, you cannot actually solve everybody's problems, and you cannot serve everybody, which ties nicely into the second question, which is, yeah, even though everybody has different ways and different problems, that's true, and you can't solve them all. So not one project will solve them all. So what it's about at a government level is having a suite of projects that then overlap and capture the different needs of different citizens. But it won't be one specific project capturing everybody's needs. I think that's it. It's part of a broader strategy, is that what I would say.
And Andy, you had that one slide where you had different personas, right? Where you had images of people that were even moving with names and a short description of what they represent, what their interests are. This type of persona development is quite useful when you're defining user groups. Think of
Absolutely.
a person that represents a certain group of users, characterize that person, make sure you cover a broad spectrum of users. And if you have to look at a certain group of people, which I think the question hints at, make sure you have personas that represent these folks so that
Exactly.
you design for them. And there's one very interesting question that talks about, what people actually say may not always be what they really do. I mean,
Correct.
behavior differs from what people respond with, and that, of course, is also tricky.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's always one of the issues. We get a little more into human psychology as we go down this route, and I think that when people are asked questions, they respond with kind of who they wish they were, almost, So I think lots of people would say, yeah, I recycle all the time, right? I recycle everything. And actually they believe in recycling, but as to whether they actually recycle everything, probably not quite the case. And so we all have a habit of doing that. Now, I know in that question that you're referring to as well, they said, how do you deal with that discrepancy between the two? Now, so one of the things that we are doing at the moment, and what I hinted to earlier, is that you can almost create a data project to validate the data for your main data project. And what I mean by that is, particularly if you're looking at spatial analysis, how people use spaces, that's something you can quite easily detect with very low tech, low expense sensors that can be deployed very quickly. So that's something we are doing right now with the client. Actually, we worked with them to design a master plan, and we've created a livability framework actually as to how we can make that site more livable, and with some interventions. And what we're doing right now actually is we're going through, we've installed some sensors on the site already to start capturing data before we do anything. So we have a baseline as well. And then what we're doing is we're implementing very low tech solutions, like there's a terminology, I think it's from Stanford University, called Pretotyping. And it's talking about, make sure you're designing the right it before you design it right. And basically, that's the approach to take, really, is that go out and test your assumptions, go out and observe people, whether that's physically observing or also using, yes, some kind of low-tech infrastructure that can help you do that. And then that's how you can find these interesting insights as well. But very good questions, very, very good points.
Thanks, Andy. And I think Sarah is coming at this from a very different perspective. As an academic, you run research projects, you test the technology to its maximum capability. Now, where do you see these two worlds meet? Like you work in the space of BIM, building information management. And there is a lot of applications in industry and of course also in government. Potential areas of implementation there's a lot of companies active in the space who are looking for opportunities to work with government and roll this out. And I think the market is small and growing fast. you as an academic observing this, where do you see the trends going? I mean, a lot of this, like you shared, requires a certain level of capability. And then there are companies that sit in between who can provide these services and kind of break it down for you into fairly easy to use tools that you just plug into a certain environment, you add your project data into it, and then you can actually see results, visualize, and so on. How is that space evolving? The missing middle, maybe.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a very good question. And what I see is that, you know, this kind of technologies are slowly adopting in industry. And the reasons, as you know, we mentioned, it could be regarding, you know, the cost of, you know, these kind of technologies, and also the, you know, expertise. And nowadays there are, you know, as you said, you know, there are platforms. For example, the platform that we have at UNSW City Future Research Center, we have a city data platform where we added some processed data into the platform specifically for example, Australian cities. These platforms are evolving, what I see, and still I see there are lacking data. Not only in developing countries. I see one question here about developing countries. Lacking data is not only for developing countries. For example, I had one student who wanted, to work on a specific research project relevant to construction-based data in Sydney. And after 6 months looking for, for data from, government companies, he decided to change his topic because, because the data was not, kind of available, and, the companies, the construction companies were not willing to share data. And I think the culture of, opening data could be kind of improved. If we have this kind of culture, we can improve accessing to, data for a range of, companies, government. And I think the future is, in the future, we will have, low expenses for even these, technologies. So, for example, maybe 50 years ago, accessing to satellite data or this imagery data was was difficult, but nowadays it's easier. It's much it is more adopted in different applications. This is the trend I also see for advanced methods. For example, for Lidar, what I read in one of the articles was that collecting Lidar data nowadays is 10 times cheaper than, for example, 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. And another, for example, advancement nowadays in Sydney is that the Lidar data over Sydney has made open by special services. And we have New South Wales special services that gives this kind of updated high resolution imagery to government bodies, to to departments. So this kind of trend is happening, and it is great. I remember a few years ago when we wanted to get information regarding flood data, processed flood data, it was very difficult for us, and always we had to contact many people to give us this data, because the getting updated in aerial imagery or satellite imagery of the area where flood happened was very difficult. But this year, New South Wales Special Services, after a few days of flood in Western Sydney, they released the data, the shape files of the data, and it was amazing. So I see this trend is going towards and making the processed data available for the public, going towards open data, and I think it's very, very promising for the future.
Thank you. And Andy, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I think it's exactly right what Dr. Sarah is saying. The cost of acquiring data is coming down considerably, which is fantastic. And I think just to bring it back to a bit of a ground level as well is that, yeah, I think don't be afraid, even though obviously we're showing here lots of ways you can collect data and the like, you can start small and you can begin your journey. That's the most important thing. Whatever is relevant and appropriate for your census, for your city, for everything else, it's getting going. That is the key element, actually, more than anything else. And so I think if you start out with some low-level sensors, you don't need to necessarily have a digital platform ready right now or anything like that, just a way of gathering the data. I think just get going on the journey, because that's one of the key things with data, to be honest as well, is we generally start out these projects. When you get to a larger data set, you actually don't necessarily know the question you're going to end up answering. While we try and we do our use cases and we talk about those aspects, new questions will come out of this, and then that might take your sensor deployment or your data collection journey on a different area, and that will guide you. As these questions come up, you will start to then find your way around what you want to answer. So I would say that, yeah, don't just start small. You can use any method that's appropriate for you. Don't think you have to go all the way to any great schemes initially. Get started, do your studies, test, iterate, and then keep going, as you say, and using these fantastic examples that Sarah mentioned, as well as we say, some low-cost small sensors in your city as well.
Yeah, the more open data platforms we will see emerge, the better this situation will get. I think the situation in many of our developing member countries around Asia Pacific is still quite, we're nascent ecosystems for data. There are some countries that are now moving into this space, and that's very encouraging. And we certainly are interested to support that. In the case of giving access to satellite data, which not only has the advantage that a lot of it is free and open, it is also not privacy sensitive usually. It means you don't need to be worried about disclosing somebody's identity, because these are fairly large pixels that represent an area rather than people, right? So there is some caveats to this, but most of the time you could say this is fairly insensitive to these concerns, and that's a nice thing to have to start with, because you can reduce the risks involved in an exercise like this. When you handle personal data like mobile phone data, and I did want to drop that little caveat here in this webinar, you do need to think about privacy and so on, and protection of data. And as public officials who are joining today, that is something you would not want to miss out on. There's one question here that says, is there a specific regional agency, I assume that means regional, like active in ASEAN, that could help city governments with access to satellite imagery data? And what are the usual pitfalls in establishing a partnership or agreement to share data? I think we should split that question and ask about the first part, which is the satellite data, and then talk a little bit about partnership on sharing data.
So can I jump in?
Yes, please, Sarah.
Okay, I think this is a very good question. We had this, situation last year for the project that I showed you. I demonstrated, some visualizations for changing of the land use. We wanted, high resolution imagery, and it took us about 3 months to, to get this kind of agreement with the city council, that because, city council has access to the data, and, government gives them, access to the high resolution imagery. But because we are university, we have to have, kind of agreement with them, and it took us, 3 months, just wasting time, because when we, even received, the data, I found that the data that they gave us is not, that much, needed, because already we have, we have open platforms, to use such data. And there is a specific, in New South Wales, there is a specific, a part of government that shares this data with, for example, city councils. But for universities, we had to, first they said, buy this, data, and then because we wanted, to do the project for, for a client who was, part of the partnership was, the city council, they said, okay, we can give you, but we have to, go for a partnership. And it was a very, I think it was kind of bureaucratic process to, waste time, to get a data that's, at the end we came up with, not using it. And
What
the
was your secret sauce of finally breaking that difficulty down? Like, because it will always be bureaucratic. There will always be a back and forth about what's the right data to share. And
the issue was that they didn't know about the agreement, what should be included in the agreement. They didn't have any idea, and we had to, one of my colleagues had to contact them frequently and, suggest them how to, come up with an agreement. And it took us, another point was that, the person responsible for this agreement, was not clear. The role in city council was not clear. Who has to, get the responsibility for developing agreement, or designing the agreement. It was kind of institutional, problem, I think. We observed.
okay,
It's a great point as well.
Sorry,
I can just jump in on that.
One example, just want to zoom out from that. You're mentioning contractual, like what could be a standard contract even about these things? What are the roles and responsibilities in a typical institution that has data? Could that be helped with? And then back to this question about an agency in the region that can help with this. Andy, do you know of any?
I mean, so obviously you can approach ESA and they have their open platforms online for a lot of their satellite data as well. You can then engage with them directly. So I think most governments also have a line to those agencies. I think that actually, I think what's more important though at the moment is actually quite what you guys were just getting into, was about actually the management of the data at the local level. And I think this is one area, and it's a great segue because in webinar 2, we will be talking about data security and governance, and this will be a great topic there. And really what that's about is, you're quite right, Sarah, most of the roadblocks we face now are people are not really data handling literate. Like people are a bit worried, what should we share, what can be shared, and also what are the ramifications of doing that. I think we've all seen issues globally about that.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, and I think what we're starting to see is more creation of things like data trusts, where actually the community are part of the governance elements of those solutions, so that they also own their own data. I think that a lot of good lessons can be learned from countries like Estonia, actually, whereby the citizen owns their data in Estonia. And if I was to go to the doctor, very slightly different use case, but if I was to go to the doctor and they want to view my medical records, I get a notification on my phone, and I have to grant them temporary access to my data because it's mine. So I think there's a lot of issues around that, to be honest with you. I don't think institutions have quite got a handle. I mean, even if you consider GDPR really, in my opinion, was the nuclear option, basically, because we didn't have the nuance in terms of understanding how much data we want to share and what are the different elements of that and impacts. GDPR kind of went all the way to one side and said, okay, we're kind of locking down the data, and we're going to walk backwards from GDPR. We're going to walk backwards from the no to the yes. And I think, so I think everyone is trying to wrangle with this question right now. And it is a great frustration for everyone involved dealing with data, but also the right thing that we are trying to protect people's privacy.
I want to draw out a few points here. So GDPR, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a European regulation on data protection, and it's quite restrictive. And it affects also people dealing with the EU or EU residents living outside the EU. So it's quite encompassing. And then something you mentioned about the institutions having bottlenecks with people and capacities. Every type of institution has different bottlenecks, I think. We have the academia that has certain bottlenecks. We have government, we have private sector. And when it comes to partnership, just want to point people to the UN Global Pulse. They have a Pulse Lab Jakarta, which is a group of people sitting in the ministry that is concerned with planning, national planning, and they basically trial and test a lot of partnerships with private sector, large companies that sit on a lot of data, mobile data, or transport data, and they have pushed the limits because they're a UN agency. They were able to get access to large data sets, but they also had to adhere to a lot of rules about how to keep that data safe because there's competition concerns. If a company shares data, there's privacy, competition, all other concerns come into the picture. So I think we're drawing a picture now that people are going to say this is way too complicated for us. This is the big data picture. This is the large data sets that we're talking about now. But zooming back to where we started in the beginning of this webinar, that was about defining a project, keeping it simple, understanding what you want to impact, and starting somewhere. Then when you want to go big and you want to interact with maybe other parts of government, national agencies, provincial agencies, and others that have experience with going and testing data sets from the European Space Agency or the American Space Agency, then please think about all the other things we just talked about. But there is a big difference between what you can do locally, what you can draw in from international, national levels. So there are institutions around, and I think you don't need to necessarily look regionally. You can even look nationally first. Lots of practitioners in the space that are using data. I think, Sarah, go ahead.
So we have a study on, finding the barriers, the main barriers of data sharing, and if it's possible, I can, share the link with, the attendees. Your insights would be very valuable for this study for my students. And I think I have shared somehow, but I'm not sure whether it is
we would have
posted.
to ask the team to share it because
Okay, sure.
they can share it with all participants. And if not, we will share it through the email after the event. I do have one comment here in the Q&A box that is very good. Sharing data is not always welcomed by agencies as they prefer to sell data. And so they use security as an excuse not to share data. This is a constraint for data sharing, efficient use, and management, and that might require adequate regulations. I think that's very true, and we are seeing more and more regulation and policymakers thinking about data as a resource, how they can open it up, how they can, especially public sector data, how that can be opened up. So whoever posted this, very true, but I think we can have hope that the situation will improve in future.
If you don't mind, I would like to just make one shameless plug, actually, for another, when we're talking about these projects and about getting started. Actually, not under this program, but under another program in ADB. We are actually conducting a call for proposals for pilots for some projects which rely on using things like artificial intelligence for pollution monitoring and for using sensor networks in reforestation and the like. So if you visit the ADB website, and we'll put a link to that as well in here, if you would like to have some opportunity to propose something, please do. We'll provide a link for you in that. Again, the ADB have a whole swathe of programs that can help really you take some of this forward. And as a bonus to that, there is some funding available for those programs as well. So just an extra incentive there. Thanks, Arndt.
Yeah, there's some more nuggets of wisdom coming through the Q&A chat. One more I'd like to share. Data, when it's not being used, is just dead information. That must be well perceived. Yes, correct. That is, a lot of data is now considered even or labeled as dark data. Data that organizations sit on, which is not structured, not used.
No idea what to do with it. Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Sarah, that must be a fascinating one for you. As an academic, you would probably love to get your hands on some of those big.
Exactly. and usually, we do so, for in different projects, we process data, to get insight from the data. And you can see, for example, one of the data sets that we used last year to derive insight was 100 years bushfire data in New South Wales, and we used this data to get insight where are the new hottest spots of bushfire in New South Wales, and you can see the publication and also the dashboard that we developed for this kind of data. So we also use other data sets and with with our students in city analytics specialization, we use different kind of data sets to get insight, and sometimes the insights are really interesting, something that we didn't expect, something new from the data, some insights new from the data, and we are really willing to partner with people, with companies, government, who are who have data sets, and they want to get insight from these kind of data sets.
So, dear participants, we've had quite a spectrum of perspectives shared by you all, but also shared by our two speakers, ranging from thinking about how you can do a targeted data project, how you can really think about your users, how can you think about impact, and how do you then ask the right questions to arrive at a proper project, all the way to maybe more the academic angle, where yes, you research the application of technology on very concrete things, but you're also tapping into the vast data resources and seeing what you can find without actually knowing what the question is, identifying interesting signals from the data that you can dive deeper into and then discover what it can be used for. So that is typical for the space of data. It's a vast canvas that people can work with, and I think we've had a very good representation in this first webinar on data collection of what all is possible. Noting, of course, that there's a lot more methods in other spaces. We were mainly focused on the built environment in cities. There's tons more out there. I would like to make a couple of announcements before we close. So today was the first of 3 public webinars on data management for people-centric smart cities, where we are all exploring questions on what city governments can do to ensure maximizing available urban data, how can data governance be improved, and how can it improve the livability of cities. If you have not yet registered for our upcoming webinars on data governance and security and analysis and decision making, you can do so by scanning the QR code on screen, and there it is, or you can click on the registration link in the chat box. And before we close out today's session, we'd like to also encourage the participants to evaluate today's webinar by scanning the next QR code that you see on your screen or clicking on the link in the chat box. Your feedback, as always, will help the team improve future webinars. And you can also, if you need, contact us to get a certificate of attendance. Please, if you need one, then send an email to ASCI-adb@ramboll.dk. That will also be posted in the chat. Don't worry if you're not able to do a screenshot of this slide or you miss out on this chat box, then email will be sent out with this information to all of you after the webinar. So we welcome your feedback. What remains to do is to thank our 2 presenters, Sarah and Andy. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today, and I hope everyone who logged in this afternoon had an interesting time and learned something new like I did. Thanks, everyone. Really
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.